Welcome to Flashes of Insight. We're discussing women's ministry in the church as priest, prophet, and leader. I'm here with Jo Ayres, lecturer and publisher from Auckland, New Zealand, Kate Burl, Cathedral Catechist from Palmerston North, New Zealand, Sister Elizabeth Young RSM, pastoral worker and school chaplain from Wilcannia Forbes in Australia, and Fiona Dyball, liturgy and faith formation officer for the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference in the Office for Social Justice, Ecology and Peace, based in Melbourne, Australia. So I see women running churches and school systems and keeping the whole thing on its legs. But the question for me is, what do you think women have to sacrifice to be part of this church?
I think people sacrifice to be part of anything. In terms of being part of the church, sacrifice comes, I think, primarily in time, the way I'm looking at it. You have to really sacrifice some things that you perhaps would like to do, but you need to actually put the time in to create the relationships and also the structures that keep things running. I think when things are healthy, things are good. When they're not so healthy, sacrifice can become something that it shouldn't become. And I'm interested in a document called Faithful Stewards of God's Grace, which comes from the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. And one of the ladies that drafted that was Andrea Dean, a great leader. And one of the points in it, I think, which is worth mentioning is there are different paths in the spiritual life, and the apostolate exercised by the individual members of the lay faithful. Their commitment to ministry should take a shape and form that remains in harmony with their particular life commitments and circumstances. So I think we can sacrifice a lot of things, but the things that we can't sacrifice are our consciences and our integrity.
What about your economics? Are you just cheap labour?
No, no one should be cheap labour. I think if you're going to actually work for the church, then there has to be an honouring of that time, but primarily as well, people make their own boundaries. And I think that women and men need to make appropriate boundaries in what they offer the church and what they can realistically offer with their lives as they are as well. So some people will feel as though they're being asked to give too much because it's impacting on family, on work commitments, on the time for their own health and well-being. And I think the time has come for us to say, if some things need to fall away, let them fall, because if it's coming at the expense of someone's health or at the time that they need to actually replenish for mission and ministry, then that's a price too high to pay.
Do you think there's also something there, though, around we make women sacrifice maybe even their desire for ministry? If they want to work in the church, they have to take a lesser role than really what they might want in their own heart?
I think this is part of a larger conversation about the discernment of gifts and what that's going to look like if we're going to survive and be the healthiest church that we can be. So the plenary, I think this plugs into a lot of things that we're talking about at the moment in terms of power and how power structures work. So if we're talking to where people are best called for the gifts that they have, we have to be honest that sometimes some people are not called to the ministries that they're given. And if they're given a ministry, was it discerned in community? Was that actually a real kind of call that they had for that, or was it what Father wanted? Now, we're getting away from that, and this is plugging into synodality as well. Are we listening to the gifts in our community? And are we sacrificing, if we're going down that way, our community to a power structure that no longer exists or is not serving us? So if we're authentically listening to people, we say, and as a teacher, we do this naturally. We're looking for kids. We'll say, what does that kid love to do? what does that person really excel at? And sometimes they haven't seen it in themselves yet.
Right.
Those
Thank you.
are gifts of the Spirit. So I think we've got to really look for where the gifts are and sacrifice our notions of clerical power or any kind of power structure that clericalizes.
Thanks, Jo. Yes, I was just interested in Fiona's point, responding to you about sacrifice of, I guess, money or financial situation and time. And I was in Melbourne previously in the Archdiocese working as a pastoral associate, and I found I was very, very supported there financially, and also in the structures. There was so much support. However, what I find in our church is that we're sacrificing people on the margins, people outside of things like city archdiocese, which have these wonderful structures in place. There are many actual jobs for people to serve if they feel a call to lifelong ministerial commitment that's discerned within a faith community. There are places in large hospital systems, school systems, prison systems, parishes that have enough financial stability. However, in the more marginal, the missionary edges, the first place is for those who can celebrate sacraments. And we are a sacramental church. I love that fact. I think that's a wonderful thing. We find sacraments so important. But for those on the edges, who can be serving them? People that are committed to them, live with them, love them, but are not able to share with them that sacramental aspect to the ministry, which adds so much. Like, I've been involved with pastoral care, teaching, not very good at that, but the liturgical sacramental side of things is a whole nother dimension. It's so valuable for those who are on the margins. And so our church perhaps is sacrificing the ability to be there with people who Jesus would have been with. So I think we need a lot of patience and hope in Christ in what we see as still, we're human, we're flawed, and we're developing as a church. We love the church, but we have hope for the future.
Yeah, thank you. Jo, you want to add to that?
I think, I've often thought it would be lovely if we had a general strike and that women just stopped doing anything for the church for perhaps a month. And then we would really see how women keep the church alive. I realise that that's not practical, but when you think about what would happen if we did that, it does throw things into relief a bit. I have to keep coming back to my hobby horse, I suppose, as a liturgist, that all the service that women do in the church needs to be affirmed in the liturgy. We need to see women taking liturgical roles that matter. They need to be preaching, they need to be welcoming people, they need to be blessing people, they need to be missioning them out, they need to be breaking and distributing the bread. Ultimately, they need to be, presiding, not presiding, leading the Eucharist. But I'm not preaching I'm not advocating just for women priests, because I think myself and a lot of women now would not want to be part of priesthood as it is at the moment. They're not into hierarchy and layers of clericalism. But somehow we do need to get the people in the pews contributing to the liturgy. And as I've said before, acknowledging and becoming adults in their faith.
Right. So, Kate, what do you think as a catechist? What are some of the things that the women have to sacrifice in order to be in the church?
The sacrifices, I suppose, it's doing the role and doing the ministry, but having your hands tied behind your back and a gag in your mouth. That's kind of what can happen or how it can feel. or there's the cost or the loss of all of the potential. And yeah, the grief with the potential that's just, been lost and not brought to actuality, which is such a sorrow for the kingdom and making the kingdom happen. Yeah.
Thank you. So Fiona, coming back to you, you started the conversation. Do you think that really the cost for most women is too high?
I think the cost of us not coming together as a community is higher, and we've got to find a way forward so that women can feel part of the liturgy, especially. I know that that's been mentioned quite a lot, and I guess my experience has been different in that the places that I've been in have been very affirming of women in leadership in liturgy. And that's the centrality of the constitution of the sacred liturgy, full, conscious, active participation. That's what we're after, and everyone having that ability recognised to participate, and to participate in the place where they feel welcomed, affirmed, that their personhood, their imago Dei, that their image of God is all equal and all welcome. I guess in talking with a lot of young women, they will take their place. They won't sort of hold back. Like they're very confident. They will set their boundaries and they will do what they can. And I think we need to probably let go of some of the notions that people can't, because I think people can, and they are, and they will. And we need to work on any structures that are not actually adhering to church teaching. Right. I think that's the real interesting thing, is that our tradition actually provides for this leadership. So let's share that information and formation with people so that they can fully take the place.
I think we've got to get in underneath this a little bit, like where really does the sacrifice lie for women? Like my sisters and friends of theirs and all the rest of it, they give the church its due, but as for being as involved and sunk into the institution as my mother might have been, it's just like, no, not going there. Good. Not then, it's now. And I think that we have to understand that young women, and all women have different things that they want to put their lives into. The church powers a lot of that self-giving if it's actually authentically tapping into the kenosis. Like if we're actually saying this is the source and summit of my self-giving, then that's what it is. But I'm glad that people don't spend every waking moment at the building. Yeah. So anybody else want to come back? Thanks, Fiona. Anyone else want to come back and just have a comment on that?
I think there's a danger for us. Like, my family's belonged to the Catholic Church since 432 when St. Patrick went to Ireland. And I value and love the tradition. But I think we're at a point where we could lose a lot of things that we really do value. And I think I'm not making as much sense as I wanted to. I think what's going to happen is if we don't engage people really and engage their lives in the liturgy, people are going to go and do it for themselves. And that's going to be not as big as schismatic, but it's going to fracture things. So I think that's a danger. I think or a reality that's happening already.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Fiona, I'd like to come back to you to have the final word.
I think what Jo said's really true, and it's already happening, absolutely. I think we have to really, if we're serious about taking Sacrosanctum Concilium at its word, that it's the source and summit of our lives, then we need to make it so.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating, thanking you who have been listening as well. This is Flashes of Insight.